Welcome back to the Group Practice Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falash, and the Group Practice Accelerator podcast is on the air. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today because I've got a special guest joining me behind the mic who has a long history of serving the healthcare community, specifically dentists and veterinarians, and his focus and expertise are going to be really useful to all of you because he works with entrepreneurs just like you. So we all know there's a laundry list of business and legal considerations to think about when you're building your group practices, from risk mitigators to structure to negotiations and employment matters. And my guest has spent his career specializing in all the things as founder of his own law firm with what I think is undoubtedly the best domain name in dental, yourdentallawyer.com. Rob Montgomery, today's legal expert who founded his own firm in 1997, is also the co-founder and co-host of the Dental Amigos podcast, along with Paul Goodman of the Dental Nachos fame. And we're so ready to get his legal perspectives today. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jamie. I'm excited to be on the podcast and looking forward to talking to you today.
All right. Yeah, we've commented on your domain before. I mean, how on earth did you grab that before anyone else?
I have to give props. And my brother-in-law does lead gen for personal injury firms. So he's very much in that, like the importance of SEO and domains and all that stuff. And literally 2 decades ago plus, he said, you need a better domain. You should get yourdentallawyer.com, and it's available. And that was back in the days, Jamie, you could just get a domain and whatever it cost on registered.com, it was like $15,
Yeah, that sounds right.
Like, as you know, like you get these solicitations from domain registration places, like you can buy this domain for $10,000. Like, oh, it's not even that good. So to give props to my brother-in-law, he was insistent that I do it. And at the time I was like, yeah, I don't know. Okay, sure.
That is complete genius. And you are the guy. When you type in dental lawyer, there's Rob. So go try it. He's there.
So I'm definitely not hiding from people on the internet.
No, certainly not.
Media.
Certainly not. So I kind of want to start, let's dial back a little bit on Rob Montgomery. What inspired you to specialize in dental law?
Like a lot of things in life, I just kind of found myself with the opportunity. When I was a young lawyer, I worked for a firm that had a dental practice ownership client who had, I think, like 12 locations at the time. He was a really good businessman, way ahead of his time. All of his spaces, this is back in the mid 90s, his offices were all in shopping centers and malls, which back then was like a stigma to that. People would refer to him sort of sneeringly as he's a mall dentist. Now, everybody's in the mall, everybody's in retail.
Right.
Very much ahead of his time. I did a lot of work for them, for his group. When I left my firm and went out and started my own practice, he had actually pulled his representation from my previous employer prior to that. And then we kind of met up again and I started doing more work for him. And in the dental world, you meet people, accountants, lenders, consultants, CPAs that were all servicing the same profession. And it was a natural for me too. I like it as a fellow professional practice owner. Even though I'm not in healthcare, I have my own professional practice and I can really identify with entrepreneurial dentists, especially like the younger dentists and the dentists that are growing their businesses and their groups. And I get excited for them. And it's fun for us to work with other professionals and help them at the time of, what is really the most important transactions of their lives when they're acquiring practices or selling a group practice. It's fun and exciting to be involved in a part of that.
Well, sure. And it gives you a different perspective as a business owner yourself, like you said. So you've walked in their shoes, you know what that's like. And to me, that your advice weighs more heavily when you've been there.
Yeah.
But hey, I was thinking of something because I know our listeners are going to ask. We always advise them to work with a lawyer who does practice in the dental space. Can you tell our listeners how the dental space is different from general healthcare law? Like what makes it unique and why is it important to work with someone like you?
I think that other healthcare verticals, especially like physician groups, I think dentists are somewhat less regulated than other healthcare professions. So they're able to do things that are more entrepreneurial and more intuitive from a business standpoint than certain physician groups and other healthcare. And I think just generally, it's good to work with people who understand the profession and the business. I mean, a lot of what we're doing from a legal standpoint in our world is not it's not super complicated. This is not like some crazy securitization, that we're putting together with like really complex documents. At least it shouldn't be. And sometimes we're doing DSO deals. That's another topic. The documentation is a lot more
Oh, sure.
involved and sophisticated. But even then, we're not really putting people on the moon with this stuff. I mean, where the value comes in with a good dental focused, dental experience lawyers, just we've seen so many deals. We know what could go wrong. We know what to look for. And, we like and pride ourselves in solving problems before they become problems, even and heading off things and making the process go smoothly, making sure that our clients are working with the right people, doing the right thing from a due diligence standpoint, cash flow, demographics, all that stuff that they're putting themselves in the position to succeed. Because we oftentimes, I like to tell clients, as lawyers, we can do the best bit of legal work ever known to business. But one thing we can't do with any of our documents is we can't make a bad deal good. So it's important to do all the other things too, especially like we're talking about cash flow projection, strategic planning, understanding your EBITDA, understanding the market, all that stuff. That's what really drives a good transaction. We're there to make sure it all gets buttoned up right, but then also making sure people are working with the right people at the right time, asking the right questions so they put themselves in position to succeed.
Well, and there are right questions that need to be asked specific to the little idiosyncrasies of the dental space. It's different than medical, it's different than optical, and they all have their own unique, I'll call them qualifiers that go with each deal. Just and the fact that you have that experience is a great value to our listeners and the dental community. So we appreciate that. And speaking of value, that kind of brings another question to mind. In thinking of legal planning, how can the right legal planning improve the value of your practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in some respects, it's easier to answer than the negative that bad
Probably.
legal planning or not planning can certainly impact you in the negative. But, again, putting yourself in the position to have a successful transition down the road, knowing that you're not going to have surprises becomes important. And I think one example, which you and I have chatted about before, is like when you talk about real estate and leases, especially in the group practice context. Well, when it comes time to sell your group of practices, let's just say 10 practices, right? And they're all third party landlords, maybe in shopping centers. And you have lease language that requires that your landlord provide consent to the assignment of the lease. And if it gives the landlord too broad of discretion, too broad veto power to not approve that assignment, you may have a great deal to sell your whole portfolio that could hinge on sort of the unreasonableness of one particular landlord. So, like planning with that, looking ahead, this is something that a practice owner wouldn't necessarily think about when they sign a lease. They're signing a lease. They're thinking, hey, this is what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to build it. This location's great. That's all awesome. That's part of the process, an important part, like I was saying, looking at the economics, the demographics. That's crucial. But what's also important is to work with somebody that says, yeah, but Doc, we also need to get this right. We need to get this assignment language right. We need other things in the lease right because we know when it comes time to sell your practice, these are going to be issues for your buyer, and we don't want to see your deal unravel. So it's really bringing that experience that for me, 30 years of experience doing this, to our client of problems that we've seen over 3 decades so that you, as the client today, have the ability to learn from the mistakes of those who came before you so that you don't find yourself in that situation. That's what experience is, just seeing things play out. I'm not going to say that there's nothing out there that couldn't have surprised me at this point, but we've seen most of it. I do like to tell clients that, rest assured, we're not learning how to do a dental transaction on your dime. We know what to do, we know what to expect, and we're going to try to head off those sort of things that are unforeseeable to you, the dentist, the practice owner now, so that you don't get haunted by them down the road.
Well, and I'm sure that you have seen enough to fill it an entire series of Dateline episodes. But let's talk about okay, so I'm a seller. I built a small or maybe not so small group, and I'm working with some trusted advisors. I want to take my business to market. Like, what do I need to be thinking about when it comes to that transaction? What are some of the big red flags or deal killers that like you were just talking about with lease assignment? What are some of those that you've come across in that process, and where does lease assignment land? Is that's high on the list?
It is. Well, it's one of those things that it's like a mechanical thing that's easily avoided, and that's something that for us is just basic. It's baked into our process.
Mhm.
If we're doing a lease for a practice owner who has a group of practices, we do it and it's baked into our process. If we're helping a young dentist do their first de novo startup, we're trying to get that language in. So that's a given for us in our office for everybody that we're working with, but
Good.
especially if you're looking at group practices, because frankly, Jamie, as you know, the stakes just get higher. And so the number's bigger and there's a lot more riding on it. And oftentimes landlords perceive that leverage and try to extract/extort things from our
Said it.
clients. So that's important. Some of the other things that I see is people, couple things. This is all kind of coming from the same place, which is not getting good advice, good consulting, good coaching. So like it really should be a process
Mhm.
to sell your practice. You should plan probably, definitely several years in advance, if not more. I'm a fan of as you're growing, you should also be thinking about what the exit strategy is going to look like. What is
Always.
the ultimate? So really thinking ahead and working with the right people to help you understand how to improve your practice, how to make it more valuable, and to guide you accordingly. And some of that too comes up as far as expectations. I mean, for me, if I'm having an initial conversation with a client or talking to a client who's evaluating a deal, I immediately want to know who's helping you with the cash flow projections. Who's telling you what this is going to look like to you financially? Because a lot of times too, Jamie, like we'll see people are beating themselves up. I don't know what to do. Can't decide if I should sell. I can't decide if I should sell to my associate or if I should just hold on to this or should I sell to a DSO? And like these decisions become a lot clearer if you have that cash flow analysis. You don't beat yourself up trying to decide which one is better as much because it becomes obvious, that,
Right.
yeah, I can do this, but I'm going to leave $5 million dollars on the table. Do you want to do that? No. Well, then you're not going to do that. You're going to do this. Stop torturing yourself. It becomes really obvious. But when the worst sort of example of that and where all that kind of comes to a head is like the dreaded unsolicited offer.
Oh,
So
yeah.
where somebody is a practice owner, they've got a group or a large practice, they get that unsolicited offer from a DSO. There's no broker involved. There's no consultant involved. There's no accountant involved. Frequently, there's not even a lawyer involved. And it says, we have valued your practice at $15 million. dollars. We want to close in 90 days, and they're like, wow, $15 million. dollars. That's great. What could
Mhm.
possibly go wrong? And we could probably spend
Well,
5 more episodes, Jamie, talking about everything that could go wrong. But at that point, you've got somebody that hasn't really been planning strategically for this transition. They're
mhm.
not set up and they're not organized to do one of these deals well. These deals can be challenging. They can be really challenging if you don't have the right team around you, people helping you understand the cash flow, understand your EBITDA, negotiate and advocate for you, and to negotiate that deal. And no planning involved because they weren't planning on selling until that unsolicited offer landed in their inbox. And rarely do those deals turn out well from what I've seen.
Yeah, well, I'm going to pause here for a second because you can see my reactions, but our audience cannot see me cringing with the words that you're saying. Unsolicited offer makes me want to crawl under my desk, which I won't because I want to talk about strategic growth and kind of touch on what you were saying there is having the right strategic plan in place is something that we just kind of jam down everybody's throats because it is so important. If you are growing a group, or let's say you're super happy at 3 to 5 practices, you don't plan to go any further, or whether you plan to add a location a year, whether that's acquisition or de novo, without the right advisors in place, you're going to make a lot more costly mistakes that are going to impact your value. They're going to impact your sale price. They're going to impact, I could go down a whole laundry list of things, but having that good personalized coaching in place, and I'm not here to, just plug Polaris, but having an advisor that understands you and can be on site and really get who you are and provide the right advice there is worth its weight in gold. And some of these things do come with, a bit of a price tag, but it's going to pay off just tenfold in the end. So yeah,
I
get
totally
that in
agree.
place.
Yeah, I mean, and this the answer and the solution to that. When people say, "Well, I don't want to spend that kind of money on
Mhm.
a consultant or a lawyer," and it's like it shouldn't be that you don't want to spend it. You have to make that decision. Not saying that's too much to spend. It's like, what is the return on that investment? Because
Right,
you can cheap out on that. I hate to say it in those terms, but that will cost you. And so ultimately, it's about finding the right person that provides value for what they charge and not to focus on the number of what they're charging, but what are you getting in return? What is that going to save you? What is that going to make you? How is that going to help you? And it should be a cash flow positive thing. You should hire a consultant who's going to be able to bring more value than what you're paying them. You should hire a lawyer who's going to bring more value than what you're paying them. So the solution there is to not to find somebody to pay less or not
right.
to pay at all. It's to find somebody that there's going to be a return on that investment.
Exactly. You want to pay them and you should have a high expectation. You
Mhm.
should, because your return, that increase in positive cash flow should be and should meet your expectations as long as you are putting in the work from your end.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And then the legal end, Jamie, I'll say, like to our audience, I know that you have a pretty broad demographic of folks that listen to your podcast. So there's some people that are growing, there's some people that are probably thinking about acquiring, some people that are thinking about selling. But a deal with a DSO or a big group that is buying a practice versus a doctor to doctor deal, they are two very different things.
Couldn't
You're
be more
still,
different. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you're selling a dental practice in both of them. And that is where the comparison ends. There's really no similarity in terms of structure of the deal. A dentist to dentist deal is going to be all cash for the most part. A deal with a DSO is going to have earnouts, holdbacks, possibly seller note, equity rollover, and so these are way more complicated deals. They are staffed differently from the buyer side. So if we're doing a deal with a dentist to a dentist, generally we got a lawyer from my team. The buyer or the seller, whoever's on the other side, has a lawyer for their team. And that's it. We go back and forth on what is a fairly collaborative, collegial transaction. A deal with the DSO, completely different. You've got a big New York, Chicago, Nashville, Miami, Dallas law firm on the other side who has 6, 8, or 10 lawyers that are working on this deal. And it's documented like $1 billion stock offering for a publicly traded company. And those documents have all kinds of traps and pitfalls and things in there where, unlike the dentist to dentist deal, where it's a practice transition, buyer and seller trying to work together, these are deals where the buyer wants to win the deal, and that's the way they're set up. They're staffed that way. And, you could say, oh, that doesn't sound right. That's unfair. That sounds evil and predatory. I mean, whatever. It is what it is,
Right.
and you're not going to change that, but you need to understand that it's different and have those expectations. And so getting the legal stuff there and understanding what you're signing yourself up for and what your risks are is key so that you can make an informed decision as far as how to negotiate, how or whether to proceed with the deal.
Yeah, exactly. And it brings us back to the point where you have to be planning 5, 10 years down the road, whether you want to build, grow, exit sooner rather than later. I mean, everyone has to exit at some point. So at the end of the day, you need to have a strategic plan in place. And, that can change over time. But without a plan, you're really flying by the seat of your pants. And if you're not using professionals who specialize in this kind of thing like you do, you're really missing the boat and just creating problems down the road. I want to shift gears. We were talking about buyers a minute ago. So, most of our listeners are entrepreneurs and they're actively building and growing their own group or in the planning phase at some point. So, in a competitive market or heck, any market, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see doctors making when buying additional locations? So, let's take a look at that from the acquisition standpoint first, and then maybe we can switch to de novo because I feel like those are going to be very different stumbling blocks.
Yeah, there are, but they're pretty similar. And what I'm going to say, the first thing which applies to both of them is a problem is just doing a deal for sake of doing a deal, acquiring a practice just because you want to grow revenue, leasing a space and agreeing to things in a lease that aren't great just because you want an additional location. Big spoiler alert, when you make decisions for those reasons that they're not usually turn out well, or I should say, oftentimes they don't. In the practice acquisition world, just growing revenue doesn't add value necessarily to the overall enterprise. These practices, as everybody knows and has heard on the podcast, we're talking about EBITDA, we're talking about multiples of EBITDA. Strategic buyers don't necessarily care about revenue, they care about profit. And so
Exactly.
growing for the sake of growing is not good. These need to be profitable acquisitions, the cash flow. And we've seen people over the years that have done deals and they've compromised on their principles, that they've bought practices that had risk that was obvious, where possibly there's one provider, and if that provider were to leave, who's going to take it over? Maybe a very Medicare, Medicaid intensive practice, things like that, where you're like, this is outside of your model, and you can tell that it's going to be a problem. And then don't figure it does. And it
Mhm.
only takes like one or two bad deals to pull down the overall EBITDA. Because like, I mean, again, if you've got a negative cash flow situation in a couple of practices, even if they're grossing $2 million each, that is not adding value to your enterprise. And then, along those lines, if you're growing and you don't have the right team, you don't have the right plan, you don't have the infrastructure to get larger, then you could have issues where you're not able to deliver and run that business as profitably as you're running your other businesses, possibly where you're more involved on a daily basis. Because, as we all know, dental practices are not absentee businesses. And the DSOs that try to do those absentee generally don't have as much success with that. You have to be hands on with these. And so if you're going to grow either through startup or through acquisition, again, people are probably sick of us saying this in this podcast, Jamie, but we'll say it again. You have to have a plan. You have
Yes.
to know that you've got the people, the structure to be able to add that additional office. And that additional office needs to have a compelling story with it, that it's going to add to your profit. It's going to grow your EBITDA. You've got the right team members, the right personnel, the right dentist, hygienist, office manager to run that well and profitably, so that that's a good addition as opposed to something that's going to bring down the value of the overall enterprise.
Oh, sure. And taking a look, and diving into, are they doing it right from an acquisition perspective? Because obviously, with de novo, these things aren't in place yet, but perhaps they are in your other locations and you're ready to duplicate that. But everything from marketing, do you have the right people and processes, which we preach about a lot? What's the chair utilization? What about legal? What do they even have operating agreements, employment agreements? What's their recruitment retention equity solution? Just really a lot to consider there and a lot that you could trip up on if you don't have the right strategic plan in place.
Yep, for sure.
So I want to shift gears one more time and talk about like some contracts and things. Like what are some of the essential legal documents that every dental practice should have?
Good question. I mean, absolutely. If you have associates, you need to have written associate agreements. Most states, the overwhelming majority of states, allow covenants not to compete. So you wouldn't have covenants not to compete in those agreements. Definitely other restrictive covenants like non solicitation of patients, referral sources, employees. These are important things. And sometimes we'll have clients, they'll say, well, I want to be a nice guy or a nice woman about this. And I had a bad non compete when I was a young dentist. I don't want to do this to these people. Like,
Mm,
well, no good deed goes unpunished in this world either.
red flag, Rob,
And
red flag.
and yeah, and what we say is like, okay, well, just give them a reasonable one. Like you don't have to be unfair about it, but realize that if you're going to sell your practice to somebody or a group of practices, and your associates have the ability to go across the street and compete against that buyer, you could very easily be devaluing the value of your practice and of your organization for no reason. Again, like if you don't like a non-compete with 15 miles, then give them one with 7. That's not unreasonable. You don't have to tie them up for 3 years. You can tie them up for a year or 2. That's okay. That's just part of what the dental business is, where these associates have so much, access to the goodwill of the practice that you have to make sure that you protect it because you're not giving it to them. You're paying them to provide dentistry. You're paying them well. That doesn't mean that they get to take the goodwill with them when they leave, which is what happens if you don't have non-competes or you don't have enforceable non-competes. So also making sure that the contracts, especially these restrictive covenants, are assignable to a purchaser of the practice. That's important too. So really good associate agreements overall, Jamie, I'll say that's an important document. Obviously, employee handbooks, making sure that you've got good policies in place and you're running your business well with your non-clinical employees. So most non-clinical people don't have employment agreements in these organizations, but having good handbooks that accurately depict and characterize what's going and capture what's going on from an HR standpoint. A lot of times people will come to us and they'll say, yeah, I've got a handbook and I don't know what it says because I've never read it. I'm like, well, that's a problem, like,
Yeah.
because it'll come up in the course of an HR issue. Can I terminate this person? No, I'm like, what's the handbook say? Like, I don't know. Well, we got to look at that for starters. So like, well, we don't follow that. Well, that's a problem too. So that's part of the planning. That's just part of running a good business generally.
How often should offices plan to review things like that? Handbook, policies, that kind of thing?
I think on a regular basis, is just like anything, we are like you see in your business and we see in ours, as things come up and you say, oh, okay, that's haven't thought about that, or I didn't think that would be an issue, or somebody would ask that question or have that expectation. Let's tweak the handbook and let's take a look at it to make sure that it's capturing what we want it to do, because this is really where you set the expectations with your team and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And as my podcast co-host Dr. Nacho Paul Goodman likes to say, dental practices are people businesses. This is the people in your team, in your office. They're very important, and so making sure that they understand what's expected of them and so that they feel appreciated and know what to do and how certain situations are going to work is important to managing and maintaining a successful business.
Sure. And people tend to do their jobs better when they know exactly what's expected of them. Our fractional COO executive, Aiden Bradley, and I have talked about that on a couple of podcasts, that there is a comfort in providing guidance, SOPs, handbooks, and things for people. But jumping back to the employment agreement part of this, I just want to add that, listen, this is your life's work. Stop trying to be nice. You can save nice for other aspects of your life, but you need to protect your business first. And, you can do it in a friendly way, you can do it in a reasonable way. There's no one size fits all, as you pointed out.
Yeah. And that is crucial too. I mean, when any kind of consulting, you're hiring a consultant or expectations with a lawyer in a deal, we hear this question a lot. Well, what's the right way to do it? There is no right way to do any of this. It's
Right.
what are your goals? What is your group? How do you like to run your business? what is your culture, what is your vision, and helping you get to that. I'm always very suspect of consultants that have the way to do it. This is the one way to do it, to grow your dental practice and your organization. And it works for everybody. No way. That's not possible.
No.
Or people that are coming to us with legal, like, well, there's just one document or one way to do this that's universally accepted. Like, no, it's not. I mean, I'm sure there are lawyers out there that will sell you their flat fee, this is the thing in a box, but that's not what is generally in everybody's best interest. So the importance of working with somebody who understands your vision, understands you, what your goals are, and can help you get there, that's unique for everybody. And you need to work with a consultant that's willing to offer that to you, not some one size fits all. Here it is, the generic out of the box, good for everybody. Because frankly, when we talk about ROI on these types of consulting and legal services, there's not a whole lot in that one size fits all product.
Yeah, you can't neatly package up people and expect it to be reproducible, scalable, because no two are the same, of course.
Yep. Yeah.
Last question for you. Are there any legal trends that are emerging in dentistry that we should watch out for?
Yeah. So I guess good question. Definitely continuing to see more sort of like DSO minority buy-ins in single practice locations and like a sub DSO JV equity arrangement. They are very case specific how they're set up. This is one of those that you can say that that's the deal overall, and that's what we would set the matter up in our management software as being. But each one of those is so completely different in how they're structured, either from the dentist buying in or the practice bringing them on. There's so many different ways to do this. That's probably maybe the best example, Jamie, of where individual consulting to make sure that you're putting something in place that's workable and consistent with what the organization wants. And I feel like a lot of times we'll see, practice groups that are bringing people on that are working with law firms and consultants that really give them what I think is like predatory advice with this.
Ooh.
And, just like any professional relationship or marriage or partnership, anything, consultant client, attorney client, if there's a winner and a loser in that relationship, generally speaking, it's not built to withstand the test of time. So you can set up these partnerships. We call them BS partnerships or partnerships with a Z, two Z's on the end in our office sometimes because they're not really partnerships. You can do that, but you may find yourself with a really unhappy minority partner at some point who didn't understand what they were doing and or become unhappy. And that's just not a tenable thing. We're starting to see more of that sort of like the latest. Here's the hot off the presses. Over the last quarter, we're seeing more like startup or de novo locations where people are bringing young dentists in on a minority ownership basis for a new location. Kind of a funky model. Not saying it's impossible, but there's a lot of hurdles and a lot of challenges with financing and what that actually is and isn't. So that's probably what the current emerging thing that we're seeing, and we're sort of cautioning people on and how that's set up on both sides, because those types of transactions can just be they're really technical and they're really involved. And there's a lot of stuff that you have to really think about and anticipate to make sure that you're doing it right. So that, again, if you're the one buying in, you don't find yourself in some bad situation that you can't get out of. Or if you're bringing that person on, you've got this partner that you can't really get rid of easily and or is not happy. And now they're the ones who are essentially charged with overseeing and taking care of possibly, $2 million of EBITDA or revenue in your practice group. That's an important person that you
Yeah.
want to be happy and invested. You don't want them to feel like they've been ripped off. So, kind of striking that balance, that's something that we're continuing to see more and more of and trying to caution people and guide them accordingly.
Oh, sure. Certainly some things to keep an eye out for there rumbling under the surface so we can circumvent those issues before they arise. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. Rob, thanks for sharing your expertise, your insights with our listeners. I know many of them would benefit from your counsel. as they build their own groups and get their practices in the growth phase. What is the best way to get in touch with you?
Probably just to go to our website, yourdentallawyer.com, as you mentioned at the
Love
outset,
it.
Jamie. And there's a page there that you can submit an inquiry and put your contact info and a brief statement of what you're looking for help for on. And either myself or one of my team members will get back to you and set up a time to talk or guide you through the initial stages of the process and onboarding.
Wonderful. Thank you. For our listeners, I'll go ahead and link that website in our show notes so you can easily find Rob and his team. And as always, if you'd like to schedule some time to learn about any of Polaris Expert Advisory Services, or maybe there's a topic we haven't covered that you want to hear us talk about, you can send us an email to info@polarishealthcarepartners.com or reach us by visiting the website at polarishealthcarepartners.com. Thanks so much for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share this episode with a friend or colleague and leave us a rating in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.